Hey guys, this is Matt Core from Ctrl+Paint.com, and a question I get all the time is, what tablet should I buy? After answering this email hundreds of times, I decided, you know what, I'm just gonna explain my history with tablets in a probably slightly longer than average video. And hopefully in watching this, you'll have the tools you need to make your own decision. Now, if you don't wanna hear about Wacom products, I encourage you to go over to the Rebel Pixels YouTube channel. I've linked it below. Tommy Oliver is great if what you want to hear about are kind of off-brand options. They're cheaper, but they might be just right for you. Okay, so let's go through my history here. It all started just about 19 years ago with the Graphier. Isn't this a beauty? This is in the days when iMacs were colorful, and this starts off a category that I'm going to call mouse replacements, because the word tablet these days has a bunch of different meanings. So with this sort of device, you plug it in with a wire that's not pictured here for some reason. And what you have is essentially a mouse and a pen, and they both work on this one surface. They go to your desktop or laptop computer. About half of my time using tablets has been one of these. So this one was tiny, but I used it for, I think, 5 or 6 years. This was my entry-level tablet at the time. I think it cost $99 and had software bundled with it. And this has been an offering that Wacom continues to do to this day. For the money, this is an absolute bargain. So I used this for years. It was very small, but it really got the job done. It allowed me to learn about Photoshop and to kind of progress as a beginner artist. Next up is the Intuos 3. This was, at the time, what they're now calling Intuos Pro, and it was their more expensive option. In this case, the size was just about the same. You can see based on the pen here, this is not a big tablet. The one addition you'll notice is that this has a slider that you could do things like brush size or opacity, and then a couple of customizable keys. In my opinion, this was the major difference between my entry-level one and the sort of professional grade ones. It was built a little better, had a little more sensitivity, but mainly it had buttons. As the years went by, I had to find the perfect version, so I got both the medium and the absurdly large Intuos 3. What I have to say about these is that they're all great. I had the false impression that the bigger, the better, because the bigger one was really expensive. I think at the time it was maybe $500, which was a lot for me. But in my mind, I had heard some artists were using them and were able to get really expert lines. And that was the problem, because with both small and medium, I was pretty good at doing color. But when it came to doing really careful line drawing, I couldn't do it as well. So I thought, okay, the big one is going to solve my problem. Well, as it turns out, the big size comes with its own issues, because it is physically pretty imposing. If you can imagine this sitting on your desk and then a laptop, which is what I was using at the time, in front of it, it's just a lot of space. Also, since this is a one-to-one mapping of the screen, what ended up happening is your arm moves further. Remember, I was used to moving essentially just my wrist around a little bit here. Once it got to this big size, I found myself literally getting tired just navigating windows. Now, these products were pretty good in terms of build quality. I really abused them. The one problem is I had to have sort of a heavy hand to get 100% brush pressure. What ended up happening is in the very center of these tablets, actually on all three of them, I started to wear out the surface, where I'd actually sort of chip away the enamel that was on top of it. And what I ended up with was kind of a bumpy, scratchy center. This was a problem. This essentially ruined the tablet. What I started doing after that was to buy a new tablet and immediately put a screen protector on the tablet, which is a little counterintuitive because there's no screen, but just putting one layer of removable plastic film actually really extends the life of these things. Another thing I've tried in the past was taking drawing paper and putting it over top and taping it down, so you actually can't see the tablet anymore, but the pen is able to work directly through the paper. This is kind of a nice thing to get that feel of the tooth of paper. If you have a nice heavyweight drawing paper, it feels way different than plastic on plastic. So it slows you down a little bit, and for a time I really liked it. So that's something to consider as well. Next up was when work got me one of these. And this was my first experience ever drawing directly on a screen. And really for me, this was kind of a life-changing moment. I'd spent 7 or 8 years drawing on the equivalent of like a mouse pad, a digital mouse pad. And here I actually switched to drawing right on the screen. And the reason this was so moving for me is because it is physically larger, but the whole thing is an image. It almost felt like drawing on a drafting table or on an easel. From a technology standpoint, this is actually the same as the Intuos 3. We have the same buttons, the same slider. Really, nothing changed. It was just drawing on the screen. This is amazing. After leaving college, I ended up buying an identical one of these. It was like my first really huge purchase after being financially independent. And I ended up having it for 7 or 8 years of hard use. It lasted through 2 or 3 desktop computers. It is a tank. This is another one of those where the screen protector was very important. I read online stories of people scratching the screens of these very expensive devices. And so I spent, $40 or $50 putting a specialized anti-glare screen protector on it, just so I could have some layer of replaceable film between me and my expensive workhorse. But to take a step back, when I was at school and I wanted to work on my own, I wanted to, be mobile, there were the very first of these, what we now think of as 2-in-1 laptops or convertible tablets. This here is a picture of my Fujitsu tablet computer. This thing was awful. I thought it was magical at the time simply because it was a laptop, and that made it way cooler than a big Cintiq just because there was this sense that I was going to go to the coffee shop and I was going to get work done. It turns out there are so many drawbacks to cram a bunch of power into a tiny little machine like this that it was a constant fight. The number one problem is this hinge here is not very strong. And so if you can imagine this in laptop form with me leaning on this drawing surface, it just had no support. So I actually built a triangular wedge out of cardboard that I would keep behind this thing just to have that kind of drafting table that I could lean on. But all in all, it was just too small. Now it's good that it had a keyboard, and this is actually what separates it from what we're about to see. But know that my first experience of the portable digital sketchbook did not live up to the hype. It was not worth the money. Now jumping ahead in time a bit here, this is a much more modern take on the same idea. This is the Wacom Companion. This happens to be the first generation. And I got it for the same reason. I thought, yeah, I'm gonna do a lot of my work sitting on a desktop, but wouldn't it be cool to have that freedom, that mobile digital sketchbook? Well, the truth is this has all the same problems. Now, it doesn't have the stability problem. Here you can see it's got this nice stand. So it's a well-engineered product, but it's just too small. The screen is so high resolution that just clicking on menus and reading text, it was all a challenge. A huge drawback is that unlike normal Cintiqs that plug into your desktop computer, this is not a very powerful Windows computer. It's very thin, it is loud with fans, it overheats. The technology might be there someday to have a desktop replacement in this sort of form factor, but we're not there yet. Now the final device I got in this category, I got very recently. It is the iPad Pro 12-inch. I used it intensively for the 2-week return period, and my takeaway is that just like these other two, it's not worth the money. There's a lot of promise with the digital mobile sketchbook idea, but we're not there yet. Unlike the other two, I did like that it's quiet, it's cool, it doesn't overheat, but it's severely limited in terms of actually getting things done. If you have the money to get one very expensive tablet, this is not the one you're gonna sit for 8 hours a day at and work. Frankly, none of these three are, because they're just too small and making too many compromises. So finally, we get to my current Cintiq. And this is far and away the biggest Cintiq I've ever had. This is the 27QHD. And just for scale, this is a 27-inch diagonal screen plus 4-ish inches on either side. I bought this without being able to see one in person, and my immediate reaction when it showed up is, oh God, this is too big. Now, since then, I have a slightly different opinion of it. I've been using it for about 2 years now, and it's actually an amazing device. It is far and away the most high quality screen I've ever used. It's got beautiful color representation. It decided to do away with embedded buttons and instead to have this little remote control. This is actually magnetic and you can shift it around. I immediately threw this in the closet. It's just not well designed. It doesn't stay put. It's not very good. The problem that this presented me with is that this device is as wide as, actually wider than my shoulders. Looking here, it's significantly wider than my shoulders. What that means is I can't have a keyboard on either side. And in order to use it comfortably, I actually have to scoot all the way up such that my belly is almost touching this. So I'm like sitting at a big drafting table. This is all fine unless you want to use a keyboard, and I use keyboard shortcuts constantly. What this required me to do was to get a keyboard tray, put it underneath the desk, and learn to touch type. I've since figured that out, and now I do have a keyboard hidden comfortably out of sight, but it wasn't easy. So the problem with this machine is that it is big and beautiful, which is great, but it's so big, you actually have to kind of change your entire workspace to accommodate it. So keep that in mind. So let's talk about conclusions. One way you could go with this is to get one of these mouse replacement devices. These days they're wireless and look a lot nicer, but small, medium, large are generally still options. These days you can also get gesture controls as an option. Personally, I don't like gesture controls. I think they're a waste of money because I like to use the keyboard. But when it comes to size, that's really just personal preference. I've used them all, and I think medium is sort of a good, safe bet. Huge is a gamble. It's expensive and it might be uncomfortable for you. But many artists swear by the small ones. So really, spending more money on this just to get bigger is not necessarily the best bet. As I mentioned, you could get a mobile tablet option. These standalone devices, to my mind, are just not worth the money. So I'd skip this option unless it's your second device. But in all my years of working, these Cintiqs are the way to go. They are expensive, but they also make working on digital art a totally different experience. It is big, it's an easel. It is something you can work all day on comfortably, and they're built like tanks. But they're expensive. Honestly, the advice I'd give is to get an old one. The Cintiq 21UX at this point is pretty old. I just sold mine about a year ago, but it was going strong. I think you could go online and find one of these for probably $600 or $700. And as long as it wasn't scratched in the center, it would be a great buy. Maybe one step newer, the 22 HD would be another good compromise. It's gonna be a little more expensive because it's a little more current, but you get it secondhand, and I think that might just be the sweet spot. It's big, it's durable, it's got great color reproduction, and you'll use it for years. Now, you could go for the big boy, the 27 like I've got. Honestly, I don't know that I would get this again. It's really, really cool, but were I to totally reboot and buy a new Cintiq today, I think I'd get the slightly smaller one, just because from an ergonomic standpoint, it gives you more options when you're laying out your studio. But I want to end on the good old Graphire, because if you're just starting out, just like I was 19 years ago, the $99 tablet will work for years. Know that you can spend hundreds more or even thousands more dollars to get better tablets, but if you're learning, this totally does the job. And especially if you're just starting out, I think the differences between all the tablets I've just shown really aren't going to be so apparent until you have a little more skill under your belt. So practice hard on the cheap tablet and then eventually work your way up to the more expensive ones, and I think you'll be really happy. So I'm sorry the video ended up being much longer than I'd hoped for, but there's a lot of different choices here, and it might be a choice you're stuck with for years. So I hope this was helpful. If you have questions, please ask them in the comments and I'll do my best to answer. And no matter which one you pick, have fun painting. Thanks for coming to the site, guys.